Columbus had been dead for 11 years, where Mexico City is today, the capital of Mexico. There was a large saltwater lake called Texcoco. On this lake, there was a huge city called Tenochtitlan. It was the capital of the Aztec Empire, spread over 200,000 square kilometers. The city was connected to the outside world by long bridges or causeways. The capital, with a population of 6 million, was singular in wealth and splendor. There were 60,000 houses in the city. These were tall buildings and spacious temples. Human sacrifices were also performed in these temples. However, women and children were not sacrificed. In the city, there were floating gardens on artificial islands. That seemed to be floating on the water. We can call them floating gardens. The city was supplied with water through a stone channel. The markets in the city were always crowded with thousands of people. Gold flowed in the lakes and rivers here, which was extracted by filtering the water and melted for use. These people who settled here for centuries were many warriors, but they were killed due to their principles and superstitions. What were their principles and superstitions? Where did the Inca civilization, a great civilization in America, disappear? The residents of this rich city had certain principles. One was that they hated betraying their enemy in a battle. They considered it cowardly to attack without a declaration of war. Their principles proved disastrous for them when a Spanish warrior with only 600 men invaded their empire. In 1544, a Spanish citizen, Hernán Cortés, reached the island of Hispaniola, the West Indies, looking for easy money. He did not have success here, but when he reached Cuba, he had a jackpot. On the island of Cuba, Diego, the Spanish governor, ordered Cortés to prepare a force and go to Mexico and settle a Spanish colony that needed to be governed by someone. So on it, on February 18, 1519, Cortés, with his 608 soldiers and sailors, left Cuba on 11 ships. Soon, ships reached the present-day coastal city of Veracruz via Tabasco. This city was included in the boundaries of the Aztec Empire. The Aztecs felt no threat to them in the landing of a small army of 600 because they had an empire of 6 million people and regarded themselves as very powerful. Similarly, Kurds, on the basis of their firearms, underestimated the power of the Aztecs. But here, the Aztecs suffered not from firearms but from their superstitions. For 300 years, there was a legend among the Aztecs that one of their gods, who was no more, would one day return. So when Hernán Cortés landed on the coast of Veracruz, he brought with him chained horses. Horses were not seen before by the people of this region. That is why the Aztecs believed their god had returned. So, instead of fighting the Spanish invaders, the local people provided them with food and drink and necessary geographical information. From them, Cortés learned about the powers and weaknesses of the Aztec Empire. So he now plans an attack on the Aztec capital. He knew that even with firearms, controlling such a large empire was not enough for only 600 people. So he started looking for people among the locals who could become his allies, and he found them. Many were from the Tlaxcala region, the fierce enemies of the Aztec Empire. Now the enemy of the enemy is a friend. So Cortés joined hands with these people, but also established his new military base in their area. The Aztec king, Moctezuma Tet, came to know about it. But the problem was that he was still confused because of his superstition, that the people who came were really the Spanish invaders, or one of them was God, that the people of this empire were waiting for. So they did not openly confront Cortés, but first tried to reconcile. He sent a lot of gold and silver to Cortés and requested that the Spanish invaders should leave if they are actually here to attack. He also sent Cortés a 6.5-foot wide gold sun frame with a separate, smaller silver frame symbolizing the moon. With these gifts, Cortés, instead of befriending him, grew more greedy. He sent his helmet to Montezuma through the messengers and asked him to put some more gold in it because his people have a disease that can only be cured with gold. Montezuma responded with an unusually open heart and filled the helmet with gold particles. When the helmet reached Cortés full of gold, he was convinced that the Aztecs had immense gold, a lot of gold. So now he cleverly sent a message to Montezuma that he didn't want war but wanted to visit their capital and see it from the inside. The Aztec king allowed this visit. In November 1519, Cortés, accompanied by 600 and 1,000 Tlaxcalan warriors, entered the city. Montezuma himself welcomed him and lodged him in his palace, but Cortés responded to it by taking Montezuma as a hostage in his palace. It happened that arms-tottering Spanish men moved around the king. They did not allow this king to leave the palace. Apparently, the king was free and host, but in reality, he had become a prisoner of Cortés. The Spanish prisoners would force the king to order the gold from outside and valuables be brought inside the palace, which they would store in rooms. Even a wall of the palace was broken, and a lot of gold, many valuable statues, and other goods were looted behind it. Cortés would have made the Aztecs fully bankrupt if he had some more time, but suddenly a problem befell him, which stopped his whole game for some time. Cortés was actually sent here by the governor of Cuba as his representative, but Cortés did not accept the governor's right over the colony he established in Veracruz. He declared himself the governor of that colony. That's why the Cuban governor sent a new army after him to Mexico to arrest him. When Cortés learned of the arrival of this army, he left 80 of his companions to guard the king in the palace and left with the rest for fighting. He reached the coast and not only defeated the new army of the governor, but also captured most of the soldiers of that army. Then he also lured these soldiers to his side, giving them the gift of gold. He is now summarizing with the rest, and the present soldiers had a small force of 1,400 men, which was quite an impressive number. He was happy with his success, but when he returned to Tenochtitlan, the game was overturned to his surprise. Cortés's men had been sieged by the Aztecs over several days. It happened in Cortés's absence that his soldiers rioted during a local religious festival in which thousands of Aztecs were chopped up barbarically. After this massacre, the Spanish invaders hid in the palace. But this massacre completely dispelled the illusion of the Aztecs that these people might be gods or something of that kind. So now the enraged citizens and Aztec soldiers have besieged the palace. They wanted to kill them. During the siege, Cortés and his force managed to get inside the palace and reached his comrades. He placed the hostage king on the rooftop of the palace and ordered him to tell his men to withdraw and not attack. However, the Aztecs did not listen to their king. They attacked the palace when the king was on the rooftop. In this battle, Montezuma too was also killed, perhaps by his own. After the king's death, Cortés and his companions decided to flee the city. They could not stop thousands and millions of people from entering the palace. The people's god illusion was gone, and the king's shield was also not there. On the nights of June 30th and July 1st, 1520, Cortés and his companions, they took as much gold as they could and began to escape. They knew that the Aztecs did not like to fight at night, so they did not keep a vigil on the palace at night. It was for this reason that the Spanish chose nighttime to flee. So when the Spanish fled to the western bridge leading out of the city, an Aztec woman spotted them and shouted. Suddenly, thousands of Aztec soldiers began to rush towards them. Aztec soldiers showered arrows and spears on the bridge. Dozens of Spanish soldiers fell into the lake with sacks loaded with gold and drowned under the weight of these sacks. This night is called Noche Triste in Spanish, which means Night of Sorrows. About 400 to 600 Spaniards were killed in this battle. The allied tribe of the Spanish also suffered heavy casualties. The Aztecs won this battle, but could not make it a complete success. Why the Aztecs had broken the back of the Spanish force in the Night of Sorrows, but their leader, Hernán Cortés, escaped. He also defeated the Aztecs, who were chasing him in a battle. Arriving at Tlaxcala, he prepared for battle with the help of his allied natives. This time he also prepared boats and new cannons to attack the Aztecs. Cortés was engaged in war preparations until the next year, 1521. But during this time, the epidemic of smallpox broke out among the Aztecs. In fact, the germs of this disease were brought by the Spanish invaders, which spread in the Aztec Empire because of them. The people of the New World, the Aztecs, were not immune to these germs, because this disease had never erupted in this new world, so the ability to fight this disease had never evolved in them naturally. The poor Aztecs could not resist the disease, and within 2 months, a large part of the city's population succumbed to the disease. While the people of the city were still struggling with the effects of the disease, in May 1521, Cortés stormed the city once again. His soldiers attacked the city from both land and water. The first boats were launched, in the water. They were larger than the small boats of the Aztecs, and were manned by soldiers equipped with firearms. Cortés's artillery then began a heavy bombardment of the city. The city was not fortified by the strong walls of the fort, so the Spanish artillery reduced many of the buildings to rubble. Then the Spanish foot soldiers, on horses, and the allies advanced to the city. The Aztecs tried to stop them from entering the city, but their spears and clubs failed against the guns of the invaders. Soon, the Spanish soldiers entered the city and started blowing away everything that came their way. But in the meantime, the Aztecs very bravely defended every street and house in their city, and every single street and house had become a battlefield, and the Spanish forces had to fight hard to occupy every building. But affected by hunger and disease, they could not continue the war for long, and we were defeated. And then the Spanish started massacring the civilians, even those citizens who were not involved in the war. In one area of the city, 12,000 people were killed. In another area, 40,000 people were killed by the Spanish invaders in one day. The Spanish invaders also cut off the city's water supply, so 50,000 thirsty people lost their lives by drinking the salty water of Lake Texcoco. Even the children in the city were killed by these Spanish invaders. Now everywhere in the city, corpses were scattered, or the Spanish forces or Christian priests carrying high crosses, who were urging the dying to convert to Christianity, while these same priests and invaders were throwing the Aztec clergy before the dogs and burning their books, because it was all wrong for them. Aztec King Cuauhtémoc, who succeeded Montezuma, was also arrested. Under the feet of this last Aztec king, these Spaniards lit a fire to force him to tell them places where the wealth might be hidden. But this king did not speak until his death, and he was hanged. Thus, the Aztec Empire ended forever, and the flag of Spain began to wave over Mexico. After the conquest of Mexico and the Aztec Empire, Spain still had a hurdle. The last hurdle was the Inca Empire. The destruction of this empire proved easier than that of the Aztecs. The Aztec Empire ended in 1521. 10 years later, Spanish forces invaded the Inca Empire as well. Now their empire was even bigger than the Aztecs. This empire of over 12 million people spreads from Ecuador to Chile. Its capital was Cusco in Peru. When the Spanish forces arrived here, Atahualpa, the king of the Inca Empire, stayed in the Peruvian town of Cajamarca with his 80,000 warriors. The Spanish force was commanded by Francisco Pizarro, who had only 181 soldiers or companions. This force was much smaller than Hernán Cortés, which conquered the Aztec Empire. Francisco Pizarro was many times ahead of Cortés in cunning and treachery. He knew he could not fight the Inca army, so he sent a message to the king, saying that he wanted to invite him. Atahualpa, like the Aztecs, failed to sense the cunning of the Spanish people. He trusted Pizarro, and 5,000 unarmed men came to him. Thus, he fell into a trap laid by him. The track the king had to pass through to reach Pizarro's camp. Around it, soldiers were made to hide. As the king of the Inca Empire reached him, Pizarro sent a priest, Vicente, to him. He asked the king to accept Christianity in obedience to Spanish King Charles. Atahualpa vehemently refused. On the king's refusal, the priest sent a message to Pizarro that the people did not accept Christianity and obedience to Charles V. So Pizarro ordered a massacre. His men opened fire on the unarmed Native Americans, and some cavalrymen charged at them with swords. 1,000 innocent people were brutally murdered by a few people within an hour. The king's palanquin was overturned and he was captured alive. Pizarro demanded so much gold from the Inca Empire for the return of the king that an entire room was filled to the brim with gold. But even after receiving this ransom of gold, he did not release the king, but put a new condition that if Atahualpa accepts Christianity, he will be released after seeking forgiveness from the Emperor of Spain. Atahualpa also accepted Christianity to save his life, but he still did not get pardon but death. There are historical paintings that show Atahualpa is being strangled to death. After the death of the king, the fate of their empire was like that of the Aztecs. This area also soon came under Spanish control. In America, it was the two empires, the Incas and the Aztecs, that had some ability to resist the European invaders, but after they were wiped out, there was no one to stop the Europeans across America. In the next few decades, areas from Mexico down to Argentina of America came under Spanish control. Portugal had also established a foothold in Brazil by that time. Then, in 1606, it happened that 3 British ships were heading to North America as a convoy. These ships were going to lay the foundation of a country in America in this new world that had to become the world's only superpower in a few centuries. Subscribe us now